I can hear my neighbor crying, saying I can't breathe. And now I'm in the struggle, saying I can't leave. We're calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. Hey, hear my neighbor cry, saying I can't breathe. And now I'm in the struggle, saying I can't breathe. We're calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. Hey, we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. Oh, I hear my neighbor crying, saying I can't breathe. Say that with us. We're calling out the struggle, and I can't leave, and I can't leave. We're calling out the violence, we're calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop, we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. We ain't gonna stop, we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. One more time. I hear my neighbor crying. Stand up, stand up. I can't breathe. And now I'm in the sun, saying I can't breathe. We're calling out the violence of the racist police, and we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. Say it again, we ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop until the people are free. We ain't gonna stop. We ain't gonna stop until the people are free. Yeah, we ain't gonna stop until the people are free. It is good to be home. I am a Southerner. I was raised about 25 miles from here in a little old place called Zen, Arkansas, with about 11 houses and 35 people. Most of the folks who raised me, many of them couldn't write their names. They had not been to college, but a college had been through them. And my grandmother, with her third grade education, had more theology in her big toe than all the seminaries in the country combined. And so it is good to be home. Brother Brad and Sister Ace and all the folks here at this wonderful organization, and to you for taking time out of your day to be with us. The blood of Mike Brown has seeded a great revolution in America. It has washed away the veneer, and it has revealed a fundamental contradiction predicated on a fundamental belief that is central to what it means to be American. And that central belief is that black life does not matter. And black religion, of which I am a proud member and partaker in as a third generation elder in the Church of God in Christ, black religion begins with the fundamental assumption that black people are human, which is a revolutionary notion inside the American empire. It begins with this understanding that I received, which was bequeathed to me by these simple people that I mentioned to you earlier, like Miss Roberta, who couldn't write her name, but used to tell me, come here, boy, and read to me about our people. She had an old snuff bucket that she would spit in, and she had a cane that she walked with because she didn't have access to decent health care, but she had royalty in her voice and dignity in her walk, even though she limped. And it was Miss Roberta and folks like that who taught me that we fundamentally understood that there was darkness in America, but the darkness would never have the last word. So they had these interesting and curious theological formations that articulate a level of theological sophistication predicated on the best of the philosophical tradition emerging out of continental philosophy. And so the great Albert Camus would say things like, the artist must never side with those who are the makers of history, but rather those who are the victims of it. Grandmama said it like this here. She said, baby, when folks are catching hell, I expect you to show up. Is that this kind of theological project that emerges out of the rural and southern South, predicated on the humanity of black people. So they said some sophisticated theological things like Jesus is the bright and morning star. He's the lily of the valley, water in dry places, a doctor in the sick room, a lawyer in the courtroom for people who did not receive justice for the majority of their lives, in which a criminal justice system was predicated on disciplining and punishing their bodies, as Foucault reminds us in his terrible text, Discipline and Punishment, where he says in the text that not only are prisons about imprisoning black bodies or imprisoning bodies, but it is also about breaking the soul. And these people rebelled against the breaking of their souls because they understood that there was darkness, but the darkness would not have the last word. This is what the blues tradition, not too far from here, down in Clarksdale, Mississippi. I've been down so long that the blues don't get me down no more. Trouble in my way. I have to cry sometime, but I lay awake at night. And that's all right, because the world's most famous Palestinian, this curious creature named Jesus, who was born to an unimportant people in an unimportant part of the world, living under occupation to a teenage mother, had something to say about their existence. That somehow, some way, they were able to craft out a space and a mode of being, an ontological orientation that says, though you do not say that I am human, I will resist. And this has been the tenuous agreement that African Americans have always had with America. We know that the empire would oppress us, and some of us will resist. Others will speak well and dress well and do all we can to assimilate to the system, and the vast majority of us are going to struggle to make $1 out of 15 cents. And that understanding that relationship between America and black bodies and the imperial mind and imperial project, the fundamental agreement was that although you may oppress us, but you won't disrespect us. And so for 4.5 hours, they left our son in the street. People often ask, why Ferguson? Why this? Why not Trayvon Martin? Or why not other cases? What is so curious about this unimportant place called Ferguson, which has become America's Nazareth? Why this place? It is fundamental because it was the level of disrespect and indignity for people for the vast majority of their history in America. We have not been able to bury our dead with dignity. And how dare you leave our son in the street for 4.5 hours? And then not only do you leave him in the street baking in the August sun, the wails of his mother were not enough to call an ambulance, but they called out police dogs. And as people gathered in the streets, they were going to put his body in the back of a trunk of a car, and the community says no. Then they engaged in peaceful, nonviolent, civil disobedience to express their rage. And what was the response of America to these children? They brought out MRAPs and automatic weapons and dogs and tear gas. But something has happened because Michael Brown's blood has shed in such a way that a new movement has emerged, but that movement won't look like your mama and your daddy's civil rights movement. This movement has tattoos and saggy pants and gold teeth and says, fuck the police. It is a new movement that has emerged. And if you are more offended by young people saying fuck the police than the fucked up conditions that they live under, then something's wrong with you, not them. Of leaders who have emerged, and let me be clear, I am neither a spokesman or a leader for this movement. I am playing catch up to these young people. Because they're young, they strong, and they march all night long. And I'm old, and I'm tired, and I've been doing this shit too long. These young people have emerged in such a way that they have made America pay attention to the humanity of black people in a way that we have not seen in over 50 years. For over 150 days, these young people have been in the street day in and day out. It is the second longest resistance in the last 50 years, second only to the Montgomery boycott. And we should be celebrating them. Let us be sure that the way in which they move in their bodies, but given the fact that America has always mocked young black people, that these young people are the bane of American existence, the president demonizes them and tells them to pull up their pants, but won't create a jobs program for them. And religious institutions alienating, isolating young people, preoccupied with a respectability project that is more about how things look rather than the substance of their existence. And a nonprofit industrial complex that is more concerned about turning in foundation grants and reports than liberating our people. But these young people that I've been privileged to chase behind in the streets of Ferguson have emerged in such a way that they will not bow down. I have seen them night after night face paints and tear gas and clergy who are trying to coerce them and trying to co-opt them, but they will not bow down. I've seen them spray tear gas on them, and I've seen them pepper spray them, but they come back night after night after night and saying, when the police tell them to go home, they say, you go home, we're already home. But at the risk of repeating myself, these young people, it doesn't look like we used to how it looked like. That this movement is black, it is poor, it is queer, and it is woman-led. New generation of leaders, and it is internationalist in its orientation from day one. They understood, they were making connections. It was the Palestinians who sent us text messages and told us how to deal with tear gas. And it is the same that the former president, the former police chief of Ferguson was trained in Israel. The same tear gas that was shot at us in Ferguson is the same tear gas that was shot at us in Palestine in 2012. These young people fundamentally understand that it's part and parcel of a global empire, because Ferguson must be situated within a broader global movement that can be marked upon the economic collapse of 2008 all over the world. People who have lived under tyranny, who have found themselves alienated and isolated, oftentimes supported by the American government in the Middle East through dictatorships that oppress the people. We see the Arab Spring emerge, and the way in which these movements have emerged, they've emerged with two fundamental practices: the reclaiming of public space and the rejection of old leadership. So there's an open disdain that that these young people have for the church, an open disdain that they have for traditional organizations that have not been present in their life, night after night. I've seen them put their lives on the line. Houses have been burned down and phones tapped and trumped up charges. I got third-degree assault on a police officer for praying. But they will not bow. They will lay their lives down. They are what we have been waiting on. For all the mockery that we make of millennials, they are selfish and not they. But it's interesting, America celebrates the greatest generation, those after the Civil War, but it's the greatest generation that is in the way of these young people who are seeking liberation. These. And what is so interesting about Ferguson is that given the fact that there was no nonprofit industrial complex infrastructure to temper the power of the movement, new leadership emerged. T-Dub, tattoos on his face. And in 3 months, the leader of the free world had to meet with him because of these young people refusing to leave the street. And all over the world, in Sarajevo, I don't even know if there are black folk in Sarajevo. Hands up. The universal sign of surrender has become the international sign of resistance. By some poor black kids that you see in the juvenile justice system, those kids are the ones. Not bow tie wearing cufflink preachers. But the children that we mock, the ones that, not in this room, but other white folks, who clutch their purses when they walk by. Those young people have presented America with a choice. What kind of nation will you be? Will you be a nation where a 12-year-old black boy can't play with a toy gun in a park? Will you be that kind of nation? Will you be the kind of nation where a man tells you, I can't breathe 11 times? Will you be that kind of nation? Will you be the kind of nation that is more interested in having one black man in the White House and 2 million of them in the jailhouse? What kind of nation will you be? Choices before us. And part of that choice and part of your responsibility is that oftentimes young people, I think it was Oprah who said she didn't know what the agenda was. She didn't know who the leaders were. I hear one of the young activists, Bree, say, Oprah, our agenda is stop killing us. That's all. Just stop killing us. Every other day in America, every other day, there is a makeshift memorial, a teddy bear being laid, candles being lit on some innocuous street corner because somebody's been killed at the hands of the police. Every other day, a mother is writing the obituary for her child, which will perhaps be the elegy for American democracy. Every other day in America. The state takes the life of one of its children, and oftentimes the retort, even among certain elements in the black community, is that, well, what about black on black crime? If a slave kills another slave, that does not make slavery moral. And in part and parcel of that consideration of black people and this obsession with black respectability and this high level of morality placed on black bodies is deeply problematic, because one of the critical features of oppression is the inability to succeed and the inability to fail, which is deny our capacity to be fully human. And if you just take a little look inside the black community, if you go to a church on Sunday morning, our fraternities, our sororities, our civic organizations, groups of black men and black women, old black women holding chicken dinners in the church basement, always place an emphasis on black dignity, black respect, and black self-determination. This is a normative part of the black community. We've always talked about dressing well and speaking well. I've been wearing suits since I was 4 years old. Because grandmama said, baby, the world is dangerous out there, and so you need to be twice as good and twice as smart in order to succeed. And so internal to the logic of the black community has always been a notion of black dignity, black self-respect, and black self-determination. What we have never had is enough federal intervention on our behalf that we can get this boot off our neck. We've always been eloquent and dignified. The way in which black people occupy space and time, the way we walk, is a sign of resistance. The way we name our children, Renisha and Trayvon and Shaniqua, these are forms of resistance of black naming, to say that my child will be unique in a culture, in a country that does not allow their humanity to be honored. We are always resisting in time and space over against odds against us. This is what Jean-Paul Sartre is wrestling with in being in time, but Sartre just was born in the wrong part of the world, because if he spent some time with my grandmother, he would have understood when he posed the question, why go on? My grandmama say, why not? I'm too busy working for my Jesus. I ain't got time to die.
The females right.
This is a tradition of black people in this country that have been able to rebel and resist, and that these young people, though they may not be connected to the tradition of the prophetic black church, but they are prophetic nonetheless. And though they are profane, they are nonetheless holy. And though they are indignant, they are nonetheless righteous in their behavior, because they have tapped into something that is fundamental about what it means to be human. Albert Camus says that when the rebel says no, the rebel is saying yes. And so every time they tell them to go home and they say, we ain't going nowhere, they are asserting a fundamental capacity of what it means to be human and taking on an ontological position in whereby their being shall be honored. These people, young, black, poor, queer, woman-led, are the new face of what justice will look like in America.
Want to do it?
They are what we have been waiting on. And oftentimes people will trot out Martin Luther King and they'll say Martin Luther King was nice and peaceful. And we set young people up with a mythology. Everybody over 40 marched with King. Or when I'm a child of SNCC, and so I know most of the people who are actually on the bridge itself. And I meet people all over the country who say, I was there. And if all the people who say they were on the bridge in Selma were actually there, it would have collapsed. And so what we do is that we set up a mythology for young people. We create this idea that all the movement was unified. Everybody was working together. And it's just simply not true. Martin Luther King in 1958 had to leave the National Baptist Convention and found the Progressive Baptist Convention with 2,000 other clergy because John H. Jackson, the black pope in Chicago, did not want the SCLC to be an auxiliary of the National Baptist Convention, so Martin Luther King has to leave. And so this idea that for young people that everybody was unified is this lie that we need to stop telling them. And the same is the case with the church. Every church was involved in the civil rights movement. And every preacher worth their weight in salt got a picture of Martin Luther King on their wall, but few are willing to make his sacrifice. Here in Memphis, King is marching with black, broke, garbage workers as a part of the Poor People's Campaign, making a connection to economic justice, calling for an economic bill of rights for poor people, making a connection among those poor whites, reservations, and the anti-war movement. And I know there's been much controversy about the movie Selma, and they say that LBJ was not portrayed accurately. And this is true. He's a lot more of a stock raving mad racist than they showed on screen. In fact, the director was very kind to him. It is LBJ who says when King in April 4th, 1967 comes out with his anti-Vietnam speech, it is Johnson who says the nigger preachers have done me in. And then also this romantic construction of Martin Luther King as though he was primarily concerned with integrating lunch counters. But as Martin Luther King as early as 1951, he says that my thinking is more socialist than it is capitalist. There's a series of love letters between him and Coretta, where Coretta gives him Edward Bellamy's socialist utopian novel, Looking Backwards. And so they write love letters to each other about it. And King says in one of those exchanges that he believed that Bellamy's conclusion was right, but he felt that capitalism needed more time to die. And that it was a system that took from the masses to give luxuries to the few. This is the Martin Luther King that we should be talking to young people about. It is this Martin Luther King who said of it, particularly in his speeches before labor groups, talks about the connection between economic justice and racism and his constant relationship with the radical part of the labor movement, which in the 50s and 60s was deeply racist. But he worked with the left, SCIU 1199 in New York, of which he said that he was a member of. And that oftentimes when we talk about nonviolence, we talk about it as something passive. But Martin Luther King began to talk about what we call a militant nonviolent civil disobedience. Some people often said that it was they think militant is an oxymoron when it comes to nonviolence, but the reality is that part of nonviolence must be an engagement with the state to create a moral drama, to prick the conscience of the nation. But the question before us is, does the nation still have a conscience? And that part of militant nonviolent civil disobedience is articulated by Martin Luther King, predicated on the creation of the Poor People's Campaign and situated in the action called Resurrection City, where thousands would go and live in D.C. and shut it down. And this is what young people say in Ferguson. If we don't get it, shut it down. If we don't get it, if we don't get it, if we don't get it, if Mike don't get it, if Trayvon don't get it, if Eric Garner don't get it, if we don't get it, that is what we must be about today. That we must be about creating the kind of disruption in social space that creates the kind of political climate whereby some form of legislation and policy can move forward. For as King noted, social movements are thermostats. Social movements are thermostats. They set the political climate. Elections and legislation are thermometers. They measure political climate. And that the task, and those, not in this room but in other rooms, but those who are saying that they need to be out of the street and that we need to go home. And what is their agenda? They do not fundamentally understand that by constantly being in the street, we've created a space whereby politicians and legislators can make moves to be able to give us some forms of decent legislation. And so this is why they must stay in the streets. Yeah. And my request to you tonight is that will you go to the street? Will you put your body on the line? Because there are young people who've lost their jobs, who've been fired, who didn't go back to college, who dropped out of high school to ensure that democracy would still be alive. And my ask of you is, are you willing to do the same? Are you willing to go to the street? Are you willing to be tear gassed? Are you willing to be pepper sprayed? Are you willing to make the kind of sacrifices that they have been able and willing to make? That doesn't mean everybody has to be on the front line. There's jail support. There are medics. There's money to be raised, and there's meals to be cooked. There is a place for us all. But in that place for us all, how do we create it in such a way that we can hold space for the young people here in Memphis? Are you willing to go to bat for them? Not try to tell them what to do, because they ain't going to listen anyway. Not try to control them. Not try to get them to look like a mythical image in your mind of what the civil rights movement and social justice movement is supposed to look like. But to create a space for them to be. To create a space for them to exercise their unique contribution and their unique gift to the possibility of what American democracy could possibly be. And yes, it will be profane. Yes, they curse. Yes, they look a lot different than you think they should look. They sound a lot different than you think they should sound. They behave in a way that you think they should not behave. But the possibilities of who they are and what they've done has emerged out of the fact that they have been betrayed by every major institution. That the traditional methods of grievance vis-a-vis the courts and elections and civil rights organizations have betrayed them. And so this is why they must take to the street. And this is why you must support them. Now, I don't say fuck the police, because I'm scared of my grandma. And she's been dead 30 years. But I have this ongoing conversation with her in my head. Like, boy, don't you say that in public. But I'll never begrudge young people's right to say it. And the same thing when people engage in property destruction. And that there was an obsession with it in America. Well, they were looting. They were burning down their communities. And so there are two problems in this construction. First, in a country which began its foundation on the trafficking of human beings, in which human beings were property, the ontological value that we place on property is imbalanced and inappropriate, because when we can commodify humans the same way we commodify cattle and the way we commodify furniture, and then that means that the moral compass of the nation is off. So when we make the moral equivalent, that they burned something, they destroyed property, and we raise that up instead of the fact that they shot our son and led him in the street for 4.5 hours like he was a dog. That there is something spiritually wrong with the nation that consistently makes that kind of moral comparison. It means the nation's moral compass is off. And then let us be clear, and King notes this in his trumpet of conscience during the riots between 65 and 68, that if you notice the property destruction was the main focus of targeted engagement. Not humans, not individuals. And this is key, that when young people engage in property destruction, they were engaging in a particular kind of political practice. That in a consumerist society, looting has political content. It is not to justify it. It is not to say that it is appropriate and it is the right way. But it is to say that when you're taught that you're supposed to buy and sell everything, that when you're taught if you consume enough, if you own enough, if you drive the right car, you're supposed to have this TV, you're supposed to have these tennis shoes. The level of marketing, as according to the work of Henry Giroux, the marketing at tweens, entire industry based on the consumption by young people who ain't got no jobs. That entire industry. And so when young people engage in the materialism that they see on Wall Street looted the world economy, and nobody been in jail. And so young people are reflecting back the kind of materialistic views of the world in such a way that they are lifting up what has become the best of America: consumption and war. But these young people understand the legacy of Dr. King more than most of us do. They understood that if you haven't found anything that you're willing to die for, you're not fit to live.
Right on, brother.
These young people have come to understand that by their might and by their will alone, that the moral arc of the universe will bend toward justice by their might and by their will. These young folks that I've been privileged to chase behind in the streets of Ferguson are its salvation. And so my challenge to you is to find you some young folk somewhere raised in hell, and you stand with them and you listen to them and you ask a whole bunch of questions. For the white folks in the room, I know it's fanciful in postmodern discourse that is obsessed with epistemic skepticism for people to be allies. We need freedom fighters. Because ally is an option. Ally means I'm in proximity of your struggle, but it ain't my struggle. Oh, but freedom fighter says that this is my struggle too. Every time they kill a black child, they kill part of me. Every time a black child goes to a decrepit school in Memphis City versus the county, that's an attack on your soul. And that part of revolutionary struggle for white folks involved in this movement is not about white folks feeling guilty for being white and having privilege. I mean, y'all should feel guilty about Justin Bieber and Vanilla Ice. You should really feel guilty. And clapping on 1 and 3. I really should feel guilty about that. I mean, I'm just saying. But that this is your struggle, these are your children. And that racism has run you just as crazy as it's done run black folk. We just a little cooler at it. The part is for you to fundamentally understand that this is your struggle too. You are part of this struggle. That part and parcel of your moral and ethical responsibility is to stand with black folk. In our movement in Ferguson, sometimes when the police come, we yell John Brown. That's for the white folks to come up front. They do tear gas white folks, and they shoot them too. And oftentimes white organizers catch the most hell because they're considered nigger lovers. But are you willing to put your life on the line? Because you believe these are your children. Just everybody close your eyes just for a few minutes. I want you to think about your baby laying in the street for 4.5 hours. I want you to think about you not being able to get to your baby. And they bring police dogs out to keep you from getting to your baby. And you see your baby bleeding out. You see him, you turn on the TV and you see them demonizing your baby. And then imagine that is the existence that you have the vast majority of your life, that your life is not valued. And that rage that you feel bubbling up on the inside. Militant nonviolence, civil disobedience becomes the container that you can take that rage and direct it at a system and prayerfully convict a nation to repent of its sin. If we don't get it, if we don't get it, if we don't get it, if Mike don't get it,
I know the hour's drawing light for some of us, but for others of us,